Simon & Schuster Audio presents an Inner Traditions audiobook, Radiant Mindfulness, How to Reach the Awakened State Beyond the Mind, by Will Johnson, read by Matthew Duplessie. Introduction. Back to the Future. Which of the following statements is correct? 1. The practice of mindfulness, observing breath as it enters and leaves the body while maintaining awareness of what you can see, hear, feel, and think, adding nothing extra, leaving nothing out, simple awareness of the components of this moment exactly as they are, takes you to the highest levels of awakening available to human being. 2. The practice of mindfulness, observing breath as it enters and leaves the body while maintaining awareness of what you can see, hear, feel, and think, adding nothing extra, leaving nothing out, simple awareness of the components of this moment exactly as they are, is essential bedrock but not the final piece to the puzzle of awakening. Number 1. Number 2? Both? Neither. Statement number 1 reasonably describes the approach to mindfulness practice whose current proliferation around the globe is one of the good news stories of our time. Bringing your attention over and over again back to the components of the present moment, what you can see, what you can hear, what your body feels like, what thoughts are present, what you can smell or taste, what your breath is doing as it enters and leaves your body, takes you from a consciousness of lost in thought that often renders you oblivious to sounds, sights, and sensations to one that is far more wakefully present to the rich, loamy, and vital sensorium of life that surrounds and penetrates you. While lost in thought mostly drums up images from the past or the future, mindfulness tethers you to the eternally changing components of the present, lambent moment. It's an important practice for those of us who've woken up to a suspicion that we're not quite as awake as we could be to the great magic show of life, that we've gone a bit sensorially dull and separated ourselves from the wondrous incandescent drama constantly appearing and morphing all around and inside us. How best to deal with so uncomfortable an admission? Enter mindfulness. Mindfulness, as I've always known it, has always felt to me to be the most effective first-line strategy to begin to confront and heal the universal pandemic of diminished awareness. Simply paying attention to what you see and hear, in effect becoming conscious of everything outside your physical body, while maintaining grounded within yourself through hitching your concentrative focus to the breath, is a fast track from unconscious muddling to conscious awakening. So, what could possibly be the problem with that? And why are you picking up that I'm hedging on throwing my hat wholeheartedly and unreservedly into number 1's ring? The long wisdom history of Buddhism has always been oriented to awakening completely, not just to becoming more aware of the condition you find yourself in, as foundational and important as that so clearly is. The cultivation of mindful awareness is prerequisite to awakening, a necessary skill that guides you to your destination, but it's not the final station itself. Much as what's happened to Hatha Yoga as it's been transported out of its original, deeply spiritualized context into the hustle and bustle of the Western world, mindfulness practice runs an equivalent risk of being co-opted into the biases of our culture rather than exposing us to and healing those biases. While there are wonderfully positive and legitimate roles for traditional mindfulness practices to play in corporate boardrooms and on Hollywood soundstages, and while its inclusion in the classrooms of our children feels really auspicious, real Dharma, the teachings across the Buddhist world, isn't just about helping a developing mind learn to stay focused or creating greater efficiency at work. Dharma views something far larger than that. Its teachings are about healing and transforming what keeps you fixed in your mind and out of touch with your body. Dharma helps you learn how to let go, in both body and mind, of whatever resistance you might be fostering that keeps you from evolving into an altogether natural, higher frequency radiance that is essentially birthright and destiny both. Radiant mindfulness is the future of mindfulness practice. While honoring the teaching of traditional mindfulness practice, it also addresses mindfulness's structural limitations and offers as a next step a simple, yet radical, approach to practice that is actually far closer to the original instructions of the Buddha. So, as you've probably already figured out, my honest, large picture answer to the question posed at the beginning of this introduction has to be number 2. In the practices of number 1, the seed gets planted in fertile ground. In the practices of number 2, the plant bursts forth into life. What I want to point out to you in this little audiobook is how radiant mindfulness differs from traditional mindfulness. And in the context of presenting the practices of radiant mindfulness, I want to show you how they're the logical evolution of traditional mindfulness. And it's not just me saying this and making it up. The Buddha said it long before me. Radiant mindfulness can be viewed as a companion volume to the radical path of somatic dharma, radiant body, radiant mind. While the earlier book focused on the posture of sitting meditation, this new audiobook takes you off the cushion into your life. In much the same way as the earlier book took issue with the orientation towards sitting meditation coming over from Asia that inserts a frozen stillness into one's posture, radiant mindfulness just as radically addresses the limitations of the world of mindfulness, suggesting how some of our most cherished beliefs are actually keeping us from the awakening we seek, and elevates the practice of mindfulness into a transformative play of radiant, evolutionary awakening. Just as sitting meditation, so commonly thought of as a concentration of mind, can evolve into the awakening of radiance throughout the entire body, so can the practice of traditional mindfulness evolve from a passive, objective observation of the reality of this very moment. These visual images, these sounds, this breath, this thought, this acceptably dialed-down world of sensation, all observed at arm's length distance from the mindful examiner, into a dynamically alive, at times even eruptive celebration of radiant awakening. I do not want you to think that I speak critically or pejoratively of traditional mindfulness practices. They're a vitally important foundational station on your journey of awakening. I'm just saying that there are more stations to come. While they so fruitfully focus on the Buddha's opening instruction on breathing, as recorded in the Satipatthana Sutta, they don't move on to exploring the instructions that follow, which culminate in an altogether radical approach to breathing and the radiance of consciousness that spontaneously arises. The Buddha's opening instruction in the Satipatthana Sutta forms the foundation for classical mindfulness practice, as well as the approach to sitting meditation in most Buddhist schools that work with breath. Keeping your attention at the front of the body, remain aware of the breath as you breathe in, as you breathe out. Bringing back the mind that so easily gets channeled off into unbidden streams of thought to the simple observation of breath helps ground us in the here and now, effectively helping us break our addiction to the mind of lost in thought. In order to keep on flowing along in the groove of its thought streams, the mind needs to dispense with awareness of something as seemingly trivial as the breath as it enters and leaves the body. The breath you breathe in and out is clearly of vital importance to your life, and yet, when you're lost in thought, you don't have any awareness of what it's doing or that it's even happening. And why should you anyway? The oxygen in the air that keeps you alive gets into your body whether you're aware of it or not. The simple answer to why should you is that bringing mindful awareness into your life feels momentously better than spending your life lost in thought, encapsulated inside your mind, while the world goes on all around you. So step 1 is shifting the consciousness of lost in thought toward awareness of breath, and classical mindfulness does this masterfully. What I've always found fascinating about this first level of instruction is that our observation of the cycles of breath needs to occur at the front of the body. Tune into the front of your body and begin to observe the breath from there. Why? What was the Buddha getting at? As I've explored these instructions over long decades, I've come to appreciate that the consciousness that passes as normal in our culture takes us out in front of our bodies. When you're lost in silent words of thought, you who you believe yourself to be is created through yet another word, I, who quite obviously is the speaker of all those thoughts. Examine yourself, and you might be surprised to find that your sense of I, the mental picture you carry of yourself, of who you are, of the thoughts you're having, which is constantly on alert, sifting through and interpreting all the sensory data that's coming to you primarily from outside your body, sits right at the front of your body. Lost in thought, but still engaged with the world, you move out in front of yourself, establishing a persona, a shield, a mask-like identity constructed from storylines of who your mind believes you to be. And then, perhaps, this imagistic place in the front of your face where your lost in thought mind believes you exist can also be felt to extend downward like a welder's protective shield, covering over your throat, your heart, even down in front of your belly. Your persona helps you as you move through the world of form. Its downside is that self-image is a thin outer layer covering over your more essential, radiant nature. Caught up in the linguistic mind of self-image, this is where we primarily live and where we take our cues on how to interact with everything we're exposed to in the life outside our body. And so it only makes sense that the Buddha would suggest that we start our journey of awakening from where we are. In the practices of concentration that many Buddhist schools promote, it's not unusual to be instructed to observe your breath as it enters and leaves your nostrils or causes the belly to slightly expand and contract as you inhale and exhale, and both of these locations are at the front of your body. Furthermore, and this is very important for the practice of classical mindfulness, you needn't change a single thing about yourself and your breath. Just become aware of it as it affects the front of your body. While the effects of this practice are wonderfully salutary, this isn't where the Buddha's instructions on breathing end. Once your awareness of breathing in and out is crystallized, you naturally enter a second intermediary level of recognition in which your sensitivity to breath becomes more refined. Every breath you take is different. Some are long, others are short. The Buddha spoke in a kind of maddening shorthand, so while you can begin noticing different lengths to your breath, you also become far more discerning of nuances, shadings, colorings, differentiations, flavors, and textures of breath. No two breaths, like no two snowflakes, are exactly alike. Short in length, longer in duration, a little rough and coarse, smooth like silk. Every breath may create a slightly different sound. This deepening awareness of the feeling quality of each individual breath naturally starts drawing you backward right into the mystery space of the body where breath takes place and sets you up for the culminating leap. As you breathe in through the whole body. As you breathe out through the whole body. Suddenly, a narrow focusing on a small part of the body explodes wide open as breath is experienced as touching into and enlivening the entirety of the body, not just affecting one small part of it, and the difference in effect between narrowly focusing on breath at the front of the body and feeling it everywhere throughout your body is huge. As I've mentioned in many of my earlier books, it's always perplexed me how the large majority of the Buddhist world embraces the first level of instruction but doesn't proceed on to exploring and examining the culminating instruction. Just be aware. Just be aware. Just be aware of reality as it is. But what if, and I know this may sound heretical to some of you hearing these words, what if awareness alone is not enough? As we will shortly see, our normal pattern of breathing, and, hence, the consciousness that accompanies it, couldn't be more different from the Buddha's instructions to breathe through the whole body. We all have inhibitions, resistances, tensions, and holdings that have implanted themselves into our fleshy tissues and keep us from being able to allow breath to come alive through the whole body. Awareness starts exposing these restrictive factors, but isn't strong enough in itself to completely melt them. On the other edge of the spectrum of strategies, forcing these factors to change is destined to fail as well. What works then? Simple letting go. Letting go of the tensions and holdings, the inhibitions and resistances that have taken up residence in your body transports you from a breath that is most likely small and suppressed and keeps you lodged within the consciousness of self-image that sits at the front of your body into a far fuller, deeper, and altogether natural breath that can be felt stimulating and awakening the entirety of your body. Just as the radical path of somatic dharma showed you how to enter into your sitting practices from the perspective not of the Buddha's opening instruction, but of the culminating one, Radiant Mindfulness will do the same for your practice of mindfulness. What if you started exploring mindfulness practices not solely from the opening instructions perspective on breathing, but from the point of view of the culminating instruction instead, discovering how you can allow a breath that can be felt moving and moving through the entire body, awakening feeling presence everywhere as it passes through. The shift in effect is radical to the practice of mindfulness. Letting go is not so much something you do as something you undo. As you learn to let go, you start unhooking the contracting, tensional clips that keep self-image and your subsequent identification with the speaker of your internal monologue so firmly fastened. So identified with self-image, you rarely get to experience what shows its face when the clips start to release. As you relax and let go of tensional restrictions to the breath, you naturally start breathing more and more through the body's entirety. How might the physical sensations of the body, the fields of vision and sound, and the consciousness that perceives all this be affected when you're able to enter into mindfulness practice while you're allowing breath to be experienced as touching into and stimulating the whole body? That's evidently what the Buddha would like us all to find out. While sitting meditation has been the primary practice of awakening in the long 2,500-year history of Buddhism, mindfulness practices may prove to be an even more natural fit as the Buddhist Dharma expands in the West. I happen to be something of a fanatic when it comes to sitting practices. As I often say, meditation is my medication. I take it every day. Even so, the catalyzed awakening and healing I experience during my formal sitting practice can leave me feeling even more aware of the tightening that occurs throughout my body and mind if, when I go out into the world, I leave my practice on the cushion. What sitting meditation has shown me is that, if I'm able to relax and let go, breath expands in volume and presence and can be felt interacting with the whole of my body. If I finish meditating and then go into town and revert to the quality of consciousness that passes as normal in the world and the pattern of breath that supports it, I can become almost uncomfortably aware of how I'm closing down again on breath and awakening. Enter Radiant Mindfulness. Exploring the approach to breath and body that I'm going to present to you in this audiobook can turn your town trip, driving in your car, walking to the supermarket, pushing your shopping cart through the aisles, interacting with the checkout clerk, having a coffee, running into a good friend, sitting down at your desk at work, into a practice of radiant awakening. It's about continuing the practices you explore on your cushion as you move about your life. Every time the Buddhist teachings have migrated into a new territory, they eventually change their forms of practice to accommodate the realities of the new region. Buddhism first appeared in the United States in the mid-1800s, got a major boost in the 1960s, and has gained steam ever since, with an estimated 4 million practicing Buddhists. It's entirely possible that the ever-changing nature and increasing speed of the contemporary Western world, so different from the older, pre-industrialized cultures of Southeast Asia, Japan, and Tibet, into which the teachings spread so many long centuries ago, is going to make it difficult to have enough time in the day to carve out space for sitting meditation practice. It may make far more personal sense to enter into your practice while you're right in the middle of your daily activities, rather than removing yourself from them by sitting down for an hour. What I particularly love about the practice of radiant mindfulness is that I can enter into it anytime, any place, and it affects a similar awakening of body, mind, and breath that occurs in the potent sitting meditation practices I wrote about in The Radical Path of Somatic Dharma. How to initiate this evolution from traditional mindfulness into a far more radiant mindfulness? It all begins with taking an honest look at how you breathe. Las Delicias, Costa Rica. Part 1. Foundations of Radiance. You are how you breathe. How are you breathing? Right now, in this very moment as you're hearing these words. Don't change a thing. Just stay in the headspace that you're in and take a moment to tune in to how you're breathing before listening any further. The quality of your breath is a mirrored reflection of your state of being in this moment. How you breathe creates who you are. One kind of breath raises you up in the radiance of love. Another kind of breath gossips and starts wars. Rumi. What kind of breath breathes you when you're absorbed in language or thinking, either creatively or subconsciously, when you're centered in the mind of words? How much oxygen is entering your body on your inhalation as you hear these words? How much used air leaves your body as you exhale? The all too obvious answer is, not very much. Lost in thought or engrossed in language, very little breath goes in and out of your body. You breathe enough to keep the body alive, but not enough to liberate its innate radiance. Most of the time, when you're fully engaged in whatever you're doing and suddenly think to turn your attention to how you're breathing, you quickly realize that there's really not much breath happening at all. What breath there is shallow, slight, faint, with only a very small amount of air entering and leaving your body, and the body hardly moves. The diminished breath that creates the consciousness that passes as normal in the world is dependent on imposing stillness onto your body. The rib cage hardly moves. Neither does the spine. The head sits still atop the rest of the body. The consciousness that passes as normal in the world at large holds back the breath, and the way you hold back on anything is to freeze and become still. The stillness creates a physical boundary beyond which breath can't go. Body becomes a barely moving container rather than a living pulsation. Stillness creates a numbing throughout the body, and numbness ensures that the natural vibratory presence of body gets dialed down. For the body to become a transmitter of radiance, its sensations want to come back alive, and its breath wants to blossom. While the holding still that keeps breath contained hides out everywhere in the body, its stillness can be particularly noticed in the rib cage. The rib cage isn't a medieval vest of armor fashioned from metal. Every one of its 24 individual ribs is designed to move, billowing outward on the inhalation, contracting back in on the exhalation. But that's not how a body lost in thought breathes. Far from it, and in fact, quite the opposite. When you're engaged with language, when you're lost in thought and identify yourself as the speaker of those thoughts, the rib cage hardly moves at all. It's frozen. It's still. For your innate radiance to come alive, breath wants to be freed from the stillness that contains it, so it can be felt making transmitted motion throughout the body's mass. It's as though your body were a balloon. Breath fills your body on the inhalation and empties itself back out on the exhalation. As you breathe in, everything in the body can be felt to expand. As you exhale, everything empties, just as though you were filling and emptying a balloon. Such a breath is the polar opposite of the small and constrained breath that being lost in thought is dependent upon. The Buddha's instructions begin by encouraging you to bring the almost entirely unconscious process of breathing to conscious awareness, to focus on the breath as it enters and leaves the body. Just start becoming aware of this most primal of bodily interactions and exchanges with the world in which you live. Maybe you're instructed to place your entire attention on the ticklish feeling the breath makes as it passes in and out of your nostrils, or how, even in the stillest of bodies, breath can be felt to slightly expand the belly forward on the inhalation and then draw it back in on the exhalation. It's a wonderful practice for developing strong concentration. Even better, it requires you to alter nothing. Don't feel you need to change a thing about what you're becoming so aware of. Just be aware, exactly as you are, exactly as breath is. The mind of concentrated awareness of the passage of breath is wonderful to experience. Moving on, however, the culminating instruction points you in an entirely different direction. It speaks to the prospect not just of becoming aware of breath, but of liberating it from its bondage inside a body that's frozen. To breathe through the whole body, you want to free the breath from the constraining tensions and holdings that keep it contained, and you also have to be willing to let go of the quality of consciousness that accompanies such a restrained breath. What I believe the Buddha is essentially telling us in his culminating instruction on breath is to discover who we are and what happens to us when we're able to experience the kind of breath that actually feels as though it's engaging and making its way through the whole body. And, once again, the good news is that exploring this level of instruction requires you to do nothing conventionally heroic. You just need to let go, to relax the tensions in your body that keep breath small, and letting go is far more a something you allow than anything you do. You hold a rock in your hand. You turn your hand to the ground. You don't need to throw it, you just let go, and the rock falls. The gesture of letting go is the opposite of muscular tensing and exertion, and to discover a breath that can breathe through the whole body, you want first just to pinpoint where that tension lives and then relax and let it go. As you keep letting go to a breath that naturally starts engaging more and more of the body, you enter a cyclic stream that, breath by breath, keeps exposing you to your innate radiance. You can't hold back the breath and expect radiant awakening to occur. And as you learn to breathe much more freely and deeply, just as the Buddha is suggesting, you can't stop radiance from blossoming. One kind of breath keeps you locked away inside your thinking mind, no matter how aware of it you may be. Another kind of breath takes you beyond your thinking mind and explodes you open into radiance. You are how you breathe. We're all doing our best at showing up for life, but still, there may be little awareness of the thought streams that run wild in our heads or the breath that sustains their current. Lost in thought is the quality of consciousness that has the votes and consensus for being normal in contemporary culture. Lost in thought, you naturally identify yourself as the one speaking those thoughts. That's you. That's who you are. And the primary mechanism you rely on to continue to function within this consciousness and sense of self is by keeping your body still and your breath small. What the Buddha is telling us in the culminating instruction is to try something altogether different. Find your way to a breath that moves through your entire body, not unlike how a wave moves through a body of water, and then welcome the far more dynamically radiant consciousness that naturally expresses itself when you do. He's not in any way suggesting that you strive to transform lost in thought into heightened awareness. The culminating instruction has nothing to do with the mind. He's just telling us to figure out how to breathe through the whole body, and suddenly awakening occurs all by itself. If your conventional pattern of breathing locks you into patterns of stillness and uncomfortably held tensions, you mostly hang out in the thought streams in your mind. So what happens to these streams? What happens to the whole dynamic of identity, so based on the who it must be that's thinking these streams, when the stillness and tension let go and you discover what it is to breathe through the whole body? Every human emotion and condition of consciousness has its own unique kind of breath. Mimes depict fear as a startled freezing of the breath at the top of an inhalation that is sudden and gasping. In anger, the breath rate accelerates and the body becomes tense. In a depressed sadness, you hardly breathe at all. What we don't see very much of is how someone immersed in radiant joy might breathe. As we've become all too aware, the benefits of technology are always accompanied by unforeseen shadows. The advent of plastic has made objects significantly lighter. It's also suffocating our oceans. Radical developments in technology that afford a vision of great promise to humanity all too quickly find their way into the munitions industry. Connecting with others through our devices ends up compromising our ability and opportunities to experience the felt intimacy of face-to-face interconnection. Increasingly, we outsource our intelligence. Our computers tabulate numbers for us, so there's no more need to learn onerous multiplication and division tables in grade school. Addition and subtraction seem to continue to make the grade. While the recent appearance of artificial intelligence will provide great benefits, it also alleviates even further demands on our intellect. I've always been intrigued by accounts of unidentified aerial phenomena, whether or not these stories are factual or apocryphal. What if, I've wondered, these UAP sightings are remnants of an alien artificial intelligence created long ago that continues to operate on its own, its extraterrestrial inventors long gone? Still, by far the most radical and powerful technology that humans have created is the ability to think conceptually, to use language for deeper communication as well as a platform for greater understanding. It's not instinctual feeling, but conceptual thought that's put a human on the moon. Our ability to think and communicate conceptually has massively accelerated the knowledge of our species. Descartes' famous dictum, "I think, therefore I am," even though derided by the Buddhist world for its suggestion that essential nature is to be found in the mind that thinks, is actually remarkably accurate. Thinking creates the consciousness of me. When I think, the speaker of all those thoughts, me, materializes automatically. And here's where thinking's shadows start showing themselves. Thinking becomes such an all-enthralling medium that we lose sight of how much the medium of language, over and above any of its contents, has affected human beings. We are a species of thinkers. All animals communicate, but we can communicate with words at a level that's not available to any other species. Whales and dolphins may have access to innately higher levels of intelligence than humans do, but neither have developed nuclear physics. Without a strong grasp of language, the greatest and most kind empath couldn't come close to deciphering the mysteries of mathematics and science, let alone improve their life expectancy through an understanding of economics and chemistry. When I was a student at university, I had the good fortune of befriending the radical psychological philosopher Julian Jaynes. His unconventional ideas resonated with me, and one of those ideas was that as our distantly ancient ancestors become better at communicating with one another through verbal language, some of the members of those early cultures begin to hear silent language that was speaking itself inside their head. What was this new silent wording, and who was doing the speaking? Initially, the people who were developing this phenomenon were looked upon as priests of the new culture, and so the voices, what we would call thoughts, were initially viewed as being messages from an unseen higher authority, or however the gods of those cultures were envisioned. Gradually, of course, this new ability became 100% widespread among all humans, so that nowadays it's hard to turn the thought radio off. Thoughts blare. They go on and on. Whoever's speaking, well, it must be me, can't seem to shut themselves off. Sometimes, random thought opens windows of creative possibilities. The large majority of thoughts, however, are just garble, the reliving of past events, the forward imagining of events that haven't yet occurred, the sportscaster running commentary on the immediacy of our lives, as though we need someone or something to help us relate to our experience by describing it in words. The problem with being perennially lost in thought is that it stifles the inherent vibrancy of body and breath. When you're lost in thought, you enter into a kind of trance or daydreaming state that can only be accessed if you hold back your breath. Lost in thought stifles the altogether natural fullness of breath and creates the consciousness of egoic separation in the process. Lost in thought inhibits the body it inhabits from moving. Everything has to be still and held, and consciousness and sense of self react accordingly. Contemporary culture is a culture that doesn't breathe much, and so the tragic shadow of this greatest of all technological achievements is that we become wholly identified with the speaker of all those thoughts, which amounts to an implosion of self into the small confines of the cranium. That's where I live is our belief, and we lose perspective that there might be alternatives. Imagine for a moment Jane's early humans suddenly realizing that there was a voice inside their heads telling them things. At first, they can only hear it dimly, as from a distance, so they narrow and direct their attention to better tune into what's being said. You can also imagine that these early evolutionaries would appear to enter into a trance, removing themselves from the sounds and sights of the world of form to better aid in receiving the silently spoken messages. How best would they enter into this kind of trance that would focus all their attention on the linguistic messages passing through their cranium? They would hold body and breath very still, better to tune in and focus on these newly emerging transmissions. And this is what we all do to this day, without much awareness that we're doing it. As you learn how to breathe through the whole body, a plug gets pulled on the out-of-control stream of random and unbidden thoughts parading itself through your cranium. And as thought recedes, like the darkness of night that keeps flowers that open to the sun dormant, radiance blossoms. Greater environmental and societal awareness keeps us from tossing our plastic bottles into the ocean. Practicing radiant mindfulness, learning how to breathe through the whole body, helps us heal the implosion of consciousness through unbidden and random thinking that has been the worst shadow of human beings' greatest technological triumph. If the suppression of breath creates a consciousness of an entity so lost in thought that body and the entity itself suffer, what might a breath that breathes through the whole body foster? To come fully alive, breath wants to be liberated from its internment in unfelt, still, inert flesh, and this is what the Buddha's culminating instruction on breath envisions and offers. The culminating instruction is breath's get-out-of-jail-free card. Don't just remain aware of the breath, liberate it. Welcome sound and vision, awaken the body, and watch as the ticker tape parade of random, unbidden thoughts start fading, turning down their volume, at times even shutting themselves off. We hope you have enjoyed this production of Radiant Mindfulness, How to Reach the Awakened State Beyond the Mind by Will Johnson, read by Matthew Duplessie. Executive Producer Mahar Asher Sperling. This audiobook was produced by Inner Traditions Audio, exclusively for Simon & Schuster Audio. For more books like the one you just listened to, visit innertraditions.com. Text copyright 2026 by Will Johnson. Production copyright 2026. Inner Traditions Audio. All rights reserved. Thank you for listening.